Before the digital age, Roman senators carried the secrets of an entire empire in their minds without a single scrap of paper. Picture the Roman Senate at the height of its power. The air is thick with the scent of incense and sweat, a cacophony of shouting, political posturing, and the rhythmic clatter of sandals on cold marble. It is a place of absolute chaos, where the fate of provinces is decided by the loudest voice in the room. Yet, in the very heart of this madness sits Marcus Tullius Cicero. He is motionless. His eyes are closed, shutting out the glint of the sunlight on the statues and the pressing crowd of lobbyists. While his rivals scramble to read from wax tablets, fumbling for their notes, really struggling, Cicero remains perfectly still. He is not lost in thought. He is wandering. He is walking through a grand, invisible architecture that exists only within the folds of his own brain. He moves from room to room in a structure built of memory, passing by marble pillars that hold his arguments, statues that guard his facts, and vast vaulted ceilings where he stores the history of the Republic itself. When he stands to speak, he does not read, he narrates. He moves through his mental halls with the precision of a master architect, pulling forth complex legal precedents and genealogies with total clarity. To those watching, it seemed like a divine gift. To the Romans, it was a technology. This was the foundation of the memory palace, an art form so potent it allowed a single man to command the political theater of the world without a single written prompt. We often look at the Roman Empire and see only the stone, the steel, and the blood spilled on the battlefield. But the true foundation of Rome wasn't just the concrete that held their aqueducts together. It was the cognitive mastery that allowed their leaders to process, store, and wield information in a way that modern minds have largely forgotten. You are about to unlock this ancient mental architecture. We are going to step into the silence of the forum and learn how to map your own mind, turning your thoughts into a fortress that no amount of information overload can breach. Imagine standing in the blistering heat of the Roman Forum. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of sun-baked marble and the restless, pulsing energy of 1,000 voices. You are Marcus Tullius Cicero, the very heartbeat of the Republic. You stand before the Senate, your robes heavy against your skin, and you are about to deliver a speech that could shift the entire trajectory of an empire. But there is no parchment in your hand. There is no digital tablet to save your place, right? There is only the silent, sweeping architecture of your own mind. To a Roman, the written word was fragile. It was a secondary tool, a slave to the intellect, A scroll could be burned, a stone tablet could be shattered by the shifting earth, and ink could fade into the dust of forgotten archives. But the mind was considered the final, invincible archive. In a world where information could literally crumble, Romans like Cicero viewed a superior memory not as a convenient study habit, but as a moral virtue. It was the mark of a disciplined soul. While we today scramble to offload our cognitive burden onto external devices, trusting our secrets, our schedules, and our knowledge to the cold, glowing glass of a smartphone, the ancients understood that by externalizing our thoughts, we were effectively lobotomizing our own potential. They did not outsource their wisdom. They built it, brick by brick, into the rafters of their consciousness.
Cicero's brilliance wasn't born of a photographic memory. It was manufactured through the Loci method. By mapping complex legal arguments to the columns, the statues, and the arches of a familiar villa, he transformed abstract logic into a physical landscape. He didn't just recite his speeches. He walked through them. But what if this ancient reliance on biological memory was hiding a deeper truth about human capability? What if our modern information overload isn't a failure of technology, but a failure to remember how to build? Because as we peel back the layers of these ancient cognitive blueprints, you might find that your own mind is far more capable of holding an empire's worth of data than you ever dared to imagine. And it truly begins, with a secret technique that hasn't been discussed in schools for nearly 2,000 years. The origin of this cognitive mastery does not begin within the marble halls of the Roman Senate, but in the tragic, dust-choked ruins of a banquet hall in ancient Thessaly. It was the 5th century BC, and the poet Simonides of Chios had been invited to recite a lyric poem to a room filled with the wealthy elite. The festivities were cut short by a brutal, sudden collapse of the roof. The structure buckled, raining stone and timber onto the guests below. The carnage was absolute, the bodies mangled beyond recognition. Yet as the survivors sifted through the debris to identify the fallen for proper burial, they were faced with an impossible task. The faces were unrecognizable, shattered by the weight of the stone. Then Simonides stepped forward. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos of the present, and retreated into the architecture of his own mind. He didn't look at the corpses. He looked at the room as it was minutes before the catastrophe. He visualized the banqueting table, the specific positions of the guests, the way the light caught the wine in their goblets. By mapping the data, the identity of each guest, onto the stationary locations of the room, he was able to guide the families to their lost kin with perfect accuracy. In that horrific moment of silence, a fundamental law of human cognition was unearthed. The human mind is not wired to store abstract data in a vacuum. It is wired for space, for geography, and for movement. The Romans, ever the pragmatists of the ancient world, recognized that Simonides hadn't just performed a feat of memory. He had discovered a mental architectural blueprint. They took this raw observation and refined it into a systematic empire-wide tool used by orators to deliver hours-long speeches without a single note, and by scholars to organize the vast archives of the Mediterranean. But this wasn't merely about remembering names at a party, right? This was the birth of the Loci method, the art of turning the mind into a living, breathing cathedral of information. Yet as we look deeper into how they structure these mental spaces, we find a detail that modern neuroscience is only just beginning to confirm, a detail so profound that if applied correctly, changes the very way you process your daily reality. How did a simple trick for identifying victims turn into the secret foundation of the Roman intellectual elite? And more importantly, why were the specific structural rules of this technique quietly scrubbed from the classical curriculum, leaving us to rely on our own failing biological hardware?
To understand the Roman mind, one must first step out of the chaotic, noise-filled reality of the present and into the cold, silent sanctity of a Roman atrium. The Roman elite did not think in lists or linear notes. They thought in stone. Their architecture was not merely for shelter. It was a physical manifestation of order, a structural skeleton upon which they draped the heavy, intricate fabric of their intellect. Imagine standing in the center of a grand rotunda. The air is cool, carrying the faint, lingering scent of burnt frankincense and the metallic tang of damp limestone. Look up. The coffered ceiling isn't just decorative, it is a grid. Beneath your feet, the intricate geometric patterns of a mosaic floor act as a compass for the wandering mind. This was their foundation of the mind. To the Roman orator, a speech wasn't just a collection of words, it was a walk through a familiar villa. Each column supported a specific argument. Each threshold marked a transition in their logic. When they built these mental palaces, they didn't rely on abstract concepts. They anchored their thoughts to the tangible. They knew that a thought left floating in the ether of the mind is fragile, prone to the erosion of time. But a thought tethered to the fluted edge of a marble pillar or hidden behind the heavy velvet curtain of a sun-drenched alcove becomes permanent. To replicate this, you must first choose your architecture. It cannot be a place you have only seen in a photograph, right? It must be a space where you can feel the texture of the masonry, where you know the exact weight of the door as it swings on its iron hinges, and where you can hear the echo of your own footsteps against the floor. This is not about visualization, it is about reconstruction. You are not building a map of your thoughts yet, you are building the container that will hold them, layer by layer, stone by stone. But as the architects of the ancient world well knew, choosing the structure is only the first trial. Once the frame is set, the true challenge begins.
You have to decide what is worthy of occupying the halls of your mental architecture, and more importantly, how to protect those memories from the intruders of the outside world. Why did the Romans believe that the placement of a single, seemingly insignificant object within this palace could dictate the trajectory of a leader's entire career? The Romans understood a fundamental truth that modern society has long forgotten, that the human brain was never designed to store data like a digital server. It was designed to navigate space. When a senator stood before the forum to deliver a speech that would determine the fate of a province, he wasn't reading from a scroll, He was walking through a landscape of his own creation. To the Roman mind, logic was not just an abstract sequence of words, it was architecture. They realized that by tethering a complex legal code or a lineage of ancestors to a specific pillar, a statue, or the cold, tactile grain of a marble floor, they could essentially lock the information into their physical memory. This was the architecture of logic.
Imagine entering your own mental atrium. In the center, a bust of a stern forefather holds the weight of a legal precedent. As you pace toward the western wall, the sunlight hits a mosaic that represents a diplomatic treaty. By mapping arguments onto the physical geometry of a room, these masters of the ancient world transformed the chaotic currents of their thoughts into a navigable, permanent monument. They didn't just learn information, they lived inside it. This is how they built a republic that spanned continents, not just through steel and stone, but by ensuring that every citizen, every judge, and every orator could reconstruct their entire world from memory, even in the dead of night. But here is where the brilliance turns into something far more calculated. This system wasn't just for rote memorization, right? By assigning specific rooms to specific categories, justice, war, inheritance, and ritual, they could manipulate the narrative of their own history. However, there was one terrifying flaw in this mental construction that the elites rarely spoke of. If a room within your palace became corrupted, or if a memory node was intentionally sabotaged by your own bias, how do you distinguish the truth from the monument you built to house it? The marble of the rostra is cold beneath his sandals, but the heat rising from the forum is suffocating. Thousands of eyes, politicians, citizens, rivals, are locked onto his face, waiting for the first syllable of a speech that will decide the fate of a province. He carries no parchment. He holds no scroll. In the brutal politics of Rome, to read from a script is to signal weakness, an admission that your own mind is simply not enough to command the attention of the Senate. He closes his eyes for a heartbeat, and the noise of the crowd fades into the phantom echoes of his own mind. He is no longer in the forum. He is walking through the front door of his memory palace, a grand, ethereal villa he has spent years constructing within the silence of his own psyche. He moves through the atrium, where the busts of his ancestors watch him with judging stone eyes. He passes the hearth, where the arguments of his opening statements sit like gilded statues, perfectly positioned in the flickering light of his focus. Every piece of evidence, every legal precedent, every rhetorical strike is anchored to a specific piece of furniture or an architectural detail. To speak is simply to walk. To recall is to look. Then, the terror begins. As he attempts to reach the inner sanctum, the wing of the palace housing the delicate logistics of his grand strategy, he finds a void. The door, which should have been adorned with the key arguments of his defense, is locked. Or worse, the architecture itself has shifted. A sudden, visceral jolt of panic ripples through him. In this realm of mental construction, a moment of doubt is not just a hesitation, it is a structural collapse. If the floor of his memory palace drops away, the entire narrative plunges into a bottomless chasm. He reaches out, his mental hand grasping at shadows where the logic should be, desperate to find the structural integrity of his argument before the audience decides he is a fraud. But what happens if he retrieves the wrong memory entirely? What happens when the lie he buried in the basement of his mind decides to walk into the sunlight of the main hall? To conquer the chaos of your own mind, you must transition from a mere visitor of history to the architect of your own cognitive empire. We have walked the crumbling halls of the past, right? But now, the blueprints of the Roman masters lie in your hands. It is time to construct your own monument, a fortress of memory that will never collapse under the weight of time. Begin with a space you know with the intimacy of a lover or a rival, your own home. Close your eyes and visualize the threshold. Every detail, the grain of the wood on the front door, the way the light catches the dust motes in the hallway, the exact temperature of the stone floor, must be rendered in perfect high-definition clarity. This is your foundation. Without this sensory anchor, your mental structure will be nothing more than sand in a desert storm. Now, traverse your internal architecture. In the corners of your mind, place your pillars. These are not merely abstract concepts, They are heavy, ornate, and impossible to ignore. Assign a specific, complex piece of information to each statue, each bust, each gilded archway. If you are memorizing the rise of an empire, let the marble pedestal hold the name of a fallen king. Let the tapestry draped upon the wall reveal the date of a decisive siege. When you mentally touch that pillar, the information must bloom instantly, as clear as the Mediterranean sun on white stone. The final step is the ritual of the walk. You must patrol these halls daily. Walk the path from the atrium to the peristyle, reciting each connection, reinforcing the architecture with your own focused intent. By traversing this path repeatedly, you are not merely remembering facts, you are carving them into the bedrock of your intellect. But as you finalize these chambers, you may notice something chilling. As you walk the halls you have constructed, you might find a door you never built, or a whisper coming from a room that should be empty. What happens when your memory palace begins to take on a life of its own? And what if in the deepest, darkest corner of your mental floor plan, you find something that shouldn't be there, a secret you didn't place, but one that has been waiting for you to find it? You stand amidst the ruins of your own concentration. Look closely, really look, at the architecture of your mind today, where the Romans built marble halls of memory fortified by intent and purpose. We have instead constructed a landscape of digital debris. We trade the structural integrity of the Loci method for the fractured, flickering glow of the infinite scroll. We have replaced the grand libraries of the mind with the hollow convenience of a search bar, and in doing so, you see, we have forgotten how to remember. The struggle to adapt the ancient disciplined Loci method to the modern age is not merely a task of focus, it is a battle against the decay of our own mental architecture. You find yourself standing in the grand foyer of your memory palace, right? Yet the walls are crumbling under the weight of 1,000 digital notifications. Why do we feel this persistent sense of mental fog? It is because we have stopped building. We have outsourced our cognitive heavy lifting to the cloud, allowing the muscles of our intellect to atrophy, while our focus is raided by the endless noise of the modern world.
The Romans understood something we have discarded. Knowledge is not just collected, it is housed. It requires a dwelling. When you walk through your mental chambers today, you are likely met with the clatter of useless data, shards of social media feeds and fragmented trivia, obscuring the foundations you once laid. We have become tenants in our own minds, allowing the clutter of the present to collapse the vaulted ceilings of our past. But there is a hidden consequence to this neglect, a shadow cast by our reliance on the artificial. As the runes of our focus grow more tangled and dense, something buried beneath the debris begins to stir. You believe you are simply struggling to remember where you placed your thoughts, but what if the true horror isn't the memory loss itself? What if the empty rooms you find are not empty at all, but have been quietly colonized by something else while you were busy scrolling? We have been conditioned to worship the legends of antiquity, viewing the great Roman orators not as men of flesh and blood, but as titans born with a celestial gift for total recall. We see the bust of Cicero in the marble halls of history, and we assume, that his mind was a divine temple built by the gods themselves. But this is the ultimate deception of our narrative. We treat these feats of intellectual endurance as miracles, conveniently ignoring the grueling reality of how those temples were actually constructed. The myth of the supermind serves a singular purpose. It absolves us from the work. It allows us to sigh, shake our heads, and declare that such focus is simply beyond our reach.
But, step into the silence of a Roman study at the third hour of the day. There is no magic here. There is only the biting smell of olive oil from a flickering lamp and the rhythmic, agonizing scrape of a stylus against wax. These men were not born with the ability to house empires of information within their skulls. They were the architects of their own mental prisons, spending years, decades, meticulously laying the stones of their memory palaces, one excruciating association at a time. They mastered the art of loci through repetition that would break the modern spirit. They spent hours pacing their colonnades, assigning every abstract concept to a physical anchor, building a labyrinth of thought that required constant, unrelenting maintenance. When a Roman statesman stood before the Senate, his calm exterior was a mask worn over a mind that was quite literally vibrating with the effort of navigating thousands of complex mental corridors. They were not just recalling information, they were walking a path they had paved with sweat and obsession. They knew that if their focus wavered, the entire structure would collapse, leaving them stumbling in the dark before the eyes of the Republic. We look back at these figures with a sense of awe, but we fail to see the callus on their fingers and the exhaustion in their eyes. We assume they were a different species, right? Yet they were merely men who refused to let their focus be fragmented by the noise of their world. But if they were truly just mortals using a craft that anyone could learn, why does history make it seem as if the technique died with them? Why is it that as we trace the decline of their methods, we find a strange, deliberate silence, as if someone or something realized that a mind capable of perfect memory was a threat that could not be allowed to persist?
To master the memory palace is to step into the mantle of the ancient masters. You are no longer merely a student leafing through the dust of history. You are the architect of your own intellect, a guardian of knowledge standing in the vast, silent halls of your mind. In an age fractured by the ceaseless noise of the digital world, where attention is, the most commoditized currency, this ancient technique remains the ultimate weapon. The Romans understood what we have perilously forgotten, that memory is not a vessel to be filled, but a structure to inhabit. By tethering abstract facts to the vivid geography of an imagined room, you reclaim the power to process the world with absolute clarity and precision. You cease to be a bystander in your own life, and frankly, become a gatekeeper of wisdom. History does not remember those who simply observe. It remembers those who internalize, synthesize, and endure. Your mind is the last true empire, one that cannot be raided or burned by the passing of centuries. Now, the blueprint lies within your grasp. The foundation is laid, the columns are waiting to be carved, and the threshold is yours to cross. Begin building your first floor today. Construct that first room, anchor that first memory, and steady your focus against the rising tide of distraction. What will be the very first pillar you place in the vault of your palace? Share the vision of your architecture in the comments below. And if you wish to continue exploring the lost arts of the ancients, subscribe to join us as we unlock the next hidden epoch.